How's everyone doing today? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege. Today, back on a Monday, nearly the end of the year and nearly the end of the NFL regular season. We join you guys here again today after our little holiday break. This week, I'll be on today, obviously, and then we'll be back on here on Friday before we get back to our regular schedule next Monday and throughout the week, starting off the new year and everything like that. So this week, again, it's only today and Friday, but it isn't without a lot of great news and a lot of just great football, again, that we watched over the weekend, with some more certainties around the NFL playoffs as they get closer and closer each day. We found out more about who's going to be in there, what seed they're going to be, and more about each individual team, I think. And it started off with the Vikings defeating the Green Bay Packers, which we're going to talk about. Also, the Falcons taking on the Commanders in a great win for the Commanders to lock up their playoff berth as well. We're going to talk about the Eagles, the Bills, and the Chargers as well, knowing a little bit more about their futures after this past weekend, and some more talk about the Broncos and Bengals and Monday Night Football heading into Monday Night Football tonight. So we have a lot of football to get to, but before we do that, I'd like to remind you guys, if you guys have any questions or comments you'd like to make, or just sharing any opinion, please don't hesitate to do so. Your input and insight is always a big part, and it's a great part of what makes this show even better. We always want to know what you guys are thinking, what you guys have to say. If you guys disagree with anything, please let it be heard during these live shows. And now, if you want to make it absolutely sure that your message stands out and gets featured on the show, there's an easy way to do that, just by using the new Super Chat feature. Click the $ at the bottom of the chat box to send in your Super Chat. In this way, it guarantees that your message gets on the air. I'm able to see it, read it out loud, and take the conversation in a different direction, possibly. Again, your support and whatever you guys have to say is always a big part of this show, and we appreciate you guys getting involved with it any which way you can. So go ahead and let us know what you're thinking. Hit the Super Chat button, and let's keep this show as interactive and as exciting as possible. Again, use the new Super Chat feature, click the $ at the bottom of the chat box, and let us know what's on your mind. And our first topic that you guys have the opportunity to do that with is the America Game of the Week that we saw yesterday on Fox. I almost said Sunday Night Football, but this game was one of the more anticipated games, in my opinion. Minnesota against Green Bay. Considering what we saw in their first matchup and how close that was, this game almost played out exactly the same. And Minnesota, knowing the implications and everything that they had to do in this game, to continue on this track to potentially get the number one seed, they did their part. They did their part to set up next week's finale with the Detroit Lions, potentially if the Lions also win later tonight, which could be for the NFC North title and the number one seed in the NFC, again, if the Lions win tonight against the 49ers. But yesterday, we saw the Vikings focusing more on that game. Like I mentioned, kind of connecting it to later with the Lions taking on the 49ers. For right now, before the game starts, the Vikings are the number one seed as things currently stand with a 14-2 record. And, if the Lions were to lose tonight, it would completely flip the NFC on its head. So that is just insane to think about, but that's what the Vikings have been able to do this season. And it's kind of funny that I feel like not a lot of people have talked about them too much up until maybe like a week or two ago, where Sam Darnold and just the team overall have been playing some of their best football of the season. But on the other side of things, as for the Packers, a very similar game to the first one, like I mentioned, where Minnesota got out to a big lead. In the first game, they got out to a 21-point lead, which they ultimately, gave up there towards the end, and the Packers only ended up losing by 2 points. It was pretty similar here, where at one point the Vikings were leading by 17 points, but again, the Packers came back. They surged in the fourth quarter to only make it a 2-point game, but again, they ended up on the wrong side of things, as it has become a trend for the Packers this year. They now sit at 11-5, and they'll be either the number 6 seed or 7 seed in the playoffs, depending on some more results next week. But like I mentioned before this, with the 11-5 record that the Packers have and how it's become a little bit of a trend, the loss now for the Packers makes them 0-5 against the top 3 teams in the NFC, the Eagles, the Vikings, and the Detroit Lions. I think that's a pretty consensus thing to say. And, the Lions swept them. The first game wasn't so close, but the second game, the Packers had opportunities to win, but they couldn't get it done. They were close to beating the Eagles down in Brazil, but again, there were some mistakes, some red zone deficiencies that they couldn't get together, and they ended up losing. And like we just talked about, the Vikings also swept them in 2 opportunities where the Packers almost completed a comeback, but again, the crucial word is almost. They haven't been able to close the deal, and now they've had 5 opportunities to beat 3 of the best teams in the NFC, and they haven't been able to do so, which is a bit concerning, right? Considering that you're going to have to beat at least probably 2 of them to get to where you want to be, which is the Super Bowl, obviously. But it's hard to do that considering, how the Vikings were playing. Credit to them as well, and credit to their quarterback, Sam Darnold, which at the beginning of the season, I don't think anybody, definitely not me, would have been predicting that I'd be on here after Week 17 talking about Sam Darnold having almost a 400-yard game with 3 touchdowns and potentially being the number 1 seed in the NFC. But this game, orchestrated by Darnold and the entire team, was their 9th straight game that they've won, obviously, and the 377 yards by Darnold was a personal best for him as well. So he was a big part of it, but as we look more into the game and really more of how we got to this result and how, the Packers kind of started off slow and then they kind of put it together, it was a bad start by the Packers because on their first drive, arguably their most reliable player, Josh Jacobs, fumbled on their first drive, and Minnesota recovered, but luckily for the Packers, they only were able to punt, so really no harm done there, but still a bad start. And Green Bay actually led in this game 3-0 going into the second quarter, but that's when Minnesota scored their first touchdown, and then they took the lead 3-7. Then came a moment where you look at this game and how it was only a 2-point game, and in hindsight, you look back to this moment where it was a 4th and 2, the Packers were facing a 4th and 2, and it was only halfway through the second quarter, so maybe a little bit early for some people's likings, but regardless of that, the Packers went for it on 4th and 2 early in the game, only down by 4 points, and they didn't get it. Instead of maybe getting 3 points there, they wanted to be aggressive, and they ended up with no points. And now people will look back on it and think, well, 3 points, obviously you added on, the Packers could win this game. And that could be true in some sense, but again, it just doesn't come down to one play. But it is interesting how, you look back on that and think maybe, what if in that scenario. But that was definitely a big point in the game early on. And then after that, Minnesota added 2 field goals going into halftime to extend their lead to 3-13 going into halftime. And not only that, they continued their success after the halftime period, and the Vikings added another touchdown, now winning by 17 points, like I said before. And they were in a spot where things were probably starting to reach a point where they were getting out of hand, right? If you're the Packers, you're down 17 points already. You need to get something going quickly. But after the Vikings scored that touchdown, Green Bay punted. So the Vikings had a real opportunity to put this game to bed early in the third quarter, but then you had that interception by Sam Darnold, and quickly the Packers score, and now instead of it being 27-3 or 23-3, now the game was 10-20. So very much still in this game by the Green Bay Packers, and Minnesota did get their touchdown, making it 10-27, but then you start looking at some of the other missed opportunities where Will Reichard missed his second field goal of the game, and Green Bay scored 2 consecutive touchdowns in the last 6 minutes to make it 25-27 all of a sudden. They also converted on a 2-point play, and now it's only a 2-point game, right? Now it's at a point where you're thinking, how did we even get here? The Vikings were playing so much better, and now the Packers have an opportunity to go out there and win it. But it was all for naught because of a point I'm going to get to in just a second, but because of the fact that Darnold went out there, put together a great drive, which turned out to be the last drive of the game, with some crucial first down conversions, some nice throws, a couple bootlegs that put them in a spot where they just iced the game away and they won by 2 points. And I feel like if you look at the stats, Jordan Love's obviously going to get a good amount of the blame. People will look at his inconsistencies, not just in this game, but the entire season where he's had some bad decisions or some questionable throws and things like that. And it is important, right? You don't want to have an uncertainty about your quarterback, especially how he's being paid and how we saw him play last year. But I think what's also been showing up is the Packers' average defense at best, in my opinion, right? They haven't been able to really compete with those three teams that we talked about before. They haven't been able to compete, definitely not with the Eagles defense. In some respect, also not the Vikings defense, as we saw yesterday, and even Detroit's defense for how injured they've been. I think I would trust them more to get a stop than I would this Packers team. And again, Jordan Love gets a lot of the attention, good and bad, at least from what I've seen recently in some of these results for the Packers. But I think especially without Jair Alexander, who has been missing a lot of time, obviously with a pretty serious knee injury, right? You don't like to see that. But Xavier McKinney and their rookie linebacker, Ejarian Cooper, have been their most impressive players for me. And they rely on turnovers a lot, kind of like the Steelers recently with their defense really not living up to standard. They rely heavily on turnovers to kind of keep them in games. And you look at Xavier McKinney, at one point, he was getting an interception every week or every other week. And now they've started to cut down on those, and teams are picking them apart, right? Sam Darnold, you look at these numbers, and it almost seemed like he had no problem doing it. And again, if it wasn't for that interception, like we said, this game could have been 27-3 in the third quarter. And it's not to discredit their ability to turn the ball over. That's a great thing to do, to have that ability. But again, to not be able to just line up and stop a team, just 3 downs or just giving them one conversion and stopping them later on without a turnover, I think that's where we see some of the separation from the Eagles, from the Vikings, and from the Lions as well. So it is a problem, I would say, that the Packers have to try and, tighten up a little bit. Their defense isn't god-awful, but I think it definitely could be better. And I think that gap that we see between the defenses that I mentioned already, I think that's what's kind of holding them back in these tight games where you might need to get off the field against Detroit. You might need to get off the field against the Vikings like we saw yesterday. They haven't been able to do it. So I think that's something that hopefully they can try and tighten up. It's going to be tough on the road, certainly, against some of these better teams, but we'll see. I mean, they got all the talent on offense, certainly. Josh Jacobs, I felt, didn't get going too much yesterday, but I wouldn't just put it all on Jordan Love. He did look a little bit rattled, a little bit uncomfortable, but I think this defense is also something that people should keep an eye on as we go deeper, now getting into the playoffs. So speaking about that and moving on from this game, speaking about the playoffs, there was a lot of playoff implications last night on Sunday Night Football between the Commanders and the Atlanta Falcons. We got a matchup of 2 rookie quarterbacks yet again, and we're going to talk about how each of them performed and also, obviously, the result with the Commanders winning in overtime over the Atlanta Falcons. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with that game after this break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh,
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
We are back here on the Chip Shot Football Podcast to talk about the game we saw last night between two of the better-looking rookies. And I don't think that's an overstatement. Obviously not for Jalen Daniels, but I think I've seen enough from his fellow rookie draft classmate in Michael Penix. Last night we saw another rookie battle between Jalen Daniels and a fellow rookie. I think Jalen Daniels, if I'm not mistaken, is the only rookie to face off against each other. I know, or actually no, Caleb played against Drake May, but I definitely am sure that Jalen Daniels is the only one that is 2-0, and he went 2-0 against his fellow quarterbacks from his draft class last night, like I said, playing against Michael Penix after the Falcons decided to make that move from Kirk Cousins over to Michael Penix. Jalen Daniels bested the Falcons last night, and his play specifically led to Washington to an awesome, pretty remarkable 30-24 victory in overtime, which not only was impressive, but also allowed the Commanders to clinch a spot in this year's playoffs. This was Washington's fourth win in a row that brought them to an 11-5 record, which is the first time the Commanders have reached 11 wins since 1991. Insane, and it took a generational type of quarterback like Jalen Daniels to make it happen, and I don't think there's any doubt about, his capabilities and any doubts about him probably winning Offensive Rookie of the Year, but that is a remarkable achievement by not only the Commanders, but by their young quarterback as well. And there was a lot on the line for the Commanders, obviously. To clinch a playoff spot already probably means they're going to rest everybody next week, and that's what you want for a guy in Jalen Daniels that's so young, that really didn't have an offseason, right, with all the draft stuff that was going on. To get him at least a week here where he could take a break and kind of let off a little bit, physically at least, I think that's huge for him and the Commanders as well, considering that they're going to be playing one of the better teams you'd imagine in the first round. So that's obviously huge for the Washington Commanders, but this was a game of high stakes for not only the Commanders but also the Atlanta Falcons, because a win would have kept them in control of their future going forward. But now, because they did lose this game, and heading into next week, they still need to win. But not only do they need to win now, they also need to wait for the Buccaneers to hopefully, in their case, lose against the New Orleans Saints. Whereas if they would have won last night and would have won next week, that's all they would have needed for them to make the playoffs and win the division. But because now they're one game behind of the Buccaneers, that is not possible. So the Buccaneers hold all of their, cards in their own hands, because all the Bucs need to do is win. The Falcons would be out of the playoffs and they would win the division as well. So a lot riding on next week in particular, but this was definitely a missed opportunity for the Falcons, considering, how the game went and because of how well their rookie quarterback played, right? There's a lot of things that they could have improved on, obviously, but I think Michael Penix, again showed. It's hard to say that he showed that he was well worth, that first overall pick, because it's only been 2 games. I don't want to, overblow it, but I mean, considering how he played in the first game, pretty conservative. You didn't really need much against the Giants, but in this game, I thought he made a lot of great throws. He was very poised, and he seemed to make all the right decisions when it really mattered, including that throw at the end of the game to tie it and everything like that to Kyle Pitts. That was very impressive, but not impressive enough to overcome Jalen Daniels, who, in his own right played, I would even say, very much in front or ahead of his own standards that you'd expect from him. And this is what I mean by that. Jalen Daniels not only had 227 yards passing, he had 3 passing touchdowns, and he also had a season-high 127 rushing yards and a game-winning touchdown to Zach Ertz in overtime as well, after trailing 17-7 at halftime. Also, the Commanders kept shooting themselves in the foot by having 13 penalties in this game as well. So to overcome all of that, I would say that's more impressive than maybe some people would say than more worrying about the Falcons. I think that's more impressive for the Commanders and Jaden Daniels to overcome that as well. But also, Michael Penix had 223 yards, a touchdown, and like I said, that touchdown at the end to Kyle Pitts was as important of a throw that there was in this game overall. So to see him, kind of flourish in those gotta have it moments, it definitely makes it more encouraging, that decision, right? Taking everything into account with Kirk and how he's played, the money that obviously looks a bit sketchy now, a bit suspect, I should say, going to Kirk Cousins and now that he's on the bench. This was a decision that ultimately is looking like did pay off for the Falcons, so at least that's great. But, there's still a long way to go with Michael Penix. He has a lot still to improve, and that's definitely exciting for the Falcons. But not only, did he play well, Drake London had some nice contributions as well. He was connecting well with Michael Penix. Drake London finished with 7 receptions, 106 yards. What's most important, I think, is Kyle Pitts. Not only did he have that touchdown, but he had 4 receptions for 44 yards. And I don't think it's just a question of, Kirk Cousins didn't want to use him or anything like that, and Michael Penix does. But, this is kind of 4 receptions for 44 yards for Kyle Pitts is, I think, the minimum any Falcons fan, definitely what I expect would be at least what Kyle Pitts gives me, right? With his size and abilities and things like that. This is the kind of game that I would like to see him get each and every week. And this is the minimum. This is the floor. He's capable of having 8 receptions for 90 yards or something like that. I think he's that good. And it is encouraging that at least Michael Penix looks to be using him a little bit more. Bijan, not too much to say about him that hasn't been said already. 90 yards, 2 touchdowns, 70 carries as well. But on the other side, in a game where Terry McLaurin really didn't do anything, he had 1 reception for 5 yards. Other guys stepped up. Olamide Zaccheaus going up against his former team. He had 8 receptions for 85 yards. Zach Ertz had those 2 touchdowns and 72 yards. And Jamison Crowder chipped in with 25 yards as well. Brian Robinson had 60 yards rushing, but again, didn't really need too much more with the way Jaden Daniels was playing as well. But, this game was... this game got a lot more intriguing and a lot more interesting, definitely towards the end. But at the start of things, it didn't start very well for the Falcons because Michael Penix threw an interception on his first drive, and that led to Washington scoring a touchdown right after that. But to the Falcons' credit, they did a good job of bouncing back and responding with their own touchdown to make it 7-7. And then after a couple punts in the game, it was Atlanta's defense that stepped up and they intercepted Jaden Daniels to start the second quarter, which led to Bijan's second touchdown in the game. And then Atlanta added another field goal before halftime, and they went into halftime, like I said, winning 17-7. But when things started to get a little bit interesting was in the second half when Washington received the ball to start the second half, and they scored a touchdown, cutting that lead to only 3 points for the Falcons. And then after the Falcons punted, the Commanders got back on them, and they scored another touchdown. And now the momentum is in the Commanders' hands. Right now, after 2 straight touchdowns, they're leading 21-17, and even extended it to 27-17 with 4 minutes and 30 seconds left, and Atlanta had the ball back. Definitely a lot of time, and they went on a 12-play, 3+ minute drive to not only tie the game with a touchdown to Kyle Pitts, like I said, making it 24-24, but they even had a chance to win this game because after that touchdown, there was still about a little bit over a minute left, and Washington went 3 and out. They punted it with about 50 seconds left. So all of a sudden, the Commanders are starting to worry like they could lose this game. When they were up by 7 points with about 4 minutes left, boom, the Falcons score, and now they have enough time to go down there and kick a game-winning field goal. But after, the drive started out very well for the Falcons. Michael Penix completed a 25-yard pass to Mooney with with 2 timeouts left and about 35 seconds left after that first play. But Mooney didn't go out of bounds, so the clock kept running. But like I said, the Falcons had two timeouts, but they didn't use them. They didn't use them, and the time just kept running and running and running until they finally ran another play, and it was an incomplete pass. And it obviously stopped the time, but there were 16 seconds left now. So you're holding on to these 2 timeouts, and you just let a lot of time run off the clock for whatever reason. And they kind of played themselves out of an easy field goal attempt, because the only other time they gained yards on that drive, other than that 25-yard completion, was a neutral zone infraction by the Commanders, which only made it a 56-yard field goal attempt, which obviously, if you were watching the game, the Falcons didn't hit it. It was short by about, oddly enough, probably 5 to 10 yards or something like that, and that was a missed opportunity, so the game goes into overtime, and of course, like these things go, you miss an opportunity like that, usually it winds up with you losing the game, and that's exactly what happened, because the Commanders got the ball first, and Jaden Daniels and the offense went down there to score a touchdown on the only drive in overtime, and the Commanders won the game in the end. But a lot will be said about the timeouts, and I think it should, because that's something that we saw famously with Matt Eberflus and the Chicago Bears, and I don't think it's as bad as that. I think the Chicago Bears one was really just hard to watch. This one was just a little it was just confusing, why, for whatever reason, Raheem Morris was holding on to both timeouts. I would understand it if you had maybe one, and Darnell Mooney didn't run out of bounds, but the fact that you had 2 and you ended the game still with 1 timeout in your hand, that looks bad. And they didn't even use their last timeout, like I said, and it just looks bad. It just looks bad management in a game when you have a rookie quarterback playing, right? The inexperience in him as well. You rely on the coaches, on the management of the game to kind of bail you out there and help the player out when he needs it. And I think the Falcons just missed an opportunity there to do it, and now, things are looking a bit gray for them going forward. And, I mean, you could also look at it in a more positive light, I guess, because after they completed that pass to Darnell Mooney, they threw 3 more passes, and they were all incomplete. So you could think maybe if they completed one of them, they would have been in field goal range, obviously, and they probably would have made the kick. But it really just has to be better managed in the end, because you never know what could happen. You could have 3 incompletions, right? Like ended up happening. So it was a moment where it didn't solely affect them losing the game, but it is definitely a point where a lot of people are going to go back to. And with that in mind, I mean, I don't want to kind of put it out there that Raheem Morris should be fired or anything like that for something like that, but I think going into this game with the collapse a little bit of the Atlanta Falcons, which I think is on the coaching and Kirk Cousins as well, there was already a good amount of negativity, I think, swirling around the Falcons and the coaching and things like that. There was already plenty of that. And now, after you see a moment like this, it definitely adds a bit more attention to it. But I don't think Raheem Morris should be fired or anything like that for missing the playoffs. But even though I don't think it should happen, I would understand why the Falcons could come to a decision like that, especially because they were in a good spot, leading the division, and then you get a game like this where you really could have won to confirm, you probably make the playoff because they play the Panthers next week. I could see it happening. It wouldn't surprise me, but I don't think it should. I think Raheem Morris and the Falcons would really benefit more together going forward. Even though it would be very sour for them to miss the playoffs, I don't think it should just be, just on Raheem Morris. He cost them the season. I think Kirk, as much as Raheem Morris, has to do with that. But the fact that, you look at Michael Penix now, and we talked about the decision that was made at the beginning of this segment to kind of bring him in and draft him in a spot where a lot of people were confused by it, including myself. That's a home run hit, potentially. It has the potential to be that. And Raheem Morris and this group made that decision. So I think that has at least bought him some time, at least another season, to kind of right this ship, because there are good things about this team. It would just be unfortunate for them to miss this year, but it's not like they're going to go away anytime soon. They got a lot of good players, and this loss hurts. I mean, of course they could still make it, if things go their way next week, but a very rough game last night for the Falcons. But the Commanders clinched a playoff berth, like I said, but that they were not the only team to do that over the weekend. We're going to talk about the Eagles, the Bills, and the Chargers doing the same thing as well. But in the Eagles and Bills case, they secured the number 2 seeds in the playoffs, not just a playoff berth. So we're going to go into each of those games and just talk about it a little bit and what we took away from them. That is coming up in just a few seconds.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
All right, guys, we are back here to talk about some more of the certainties and more of the guarantees that we got this past weekend from the NFL regarding who's going to be making it to the next round of the playoffs and where they're going to be, what seeds they are and who their potential opponents could be. And it all started off on Saturday. We got some of the certainty, like I was talking about the playoffs, with some of these results. And the first game on Saturday was between the Chargers and the New England Patriots. Obviously, the Patriots not having much to play for at all, but, it was some good competition obviously out there. But, the scoreline didn't really reflect it too much because the Chargers just ended up winning 40-70. A game that meant a lot more, obviously, to the Chargers because they knew that they had to win, and with that win, they would obviously clinch a playoff berth. So they came out with a lot more, I think, of a determination, a lot more of a higher level of execution, and I thought this was a game that we saw how good each facet of football by the Los Angeles Chargers could be, right? Justin Herbert had a great day. Their defense obviously had a great game as well. Justin Herbert threw for 3 touchdowns. J.K. Dobbins got in the end zone, and Ladd McConkey continues to impress with 2 touchdowns and 94 yards on 8 receptions as well. Everything that they did turned out pretty well. Their defense got to Drake May 4 times, held them to 117 yards, and no receiver had more than 46 receiving yards for the Patriots as well. Obviously, 2 different scenarios, 2 different points in development, right, considering Justin Herbert and where Drake May and the Patriots are obviously at this point in the year, or in their own, development process. But yeah, it was a blowout win, obviously, and it meant that the Chargers have made their second playoff appearance in the last 3 seasons. The first one, obviously, with Jim Harbaugh being the head coach in his first season. And just overall, the Chargers outgained the Patriots 428 yards to only 181. And with this victory, the Chargers have a clearer idea of where they could be. They're sitting as the number 6 seed right now in the playoffs, but that could be subject to change depending on some more of the results, coming up next week with, the Steelers playing the Bengals, the Broncos playing the Chiefs, the Ravens taking on the Cleveland Browns as well. So there is still a good amount to play for, and how it all, could shape out eventually. But we know that the Chargers right now sit at the 6th seed. The Broncos could clinch the number 7 seed if they were to, just win, but that team could end up being the Bengals. And if the Chargers lose for whatever reason and the Broncos win, I'm pretty sure that could also shake things up. So, I think 6-7 would be most likely where the Chargers end up. And considering that, it would mean probably playing the Bills if they're the 7th seed, which I don't think anybody wants to do, especially in Buffalo. So they're definitely going to be gunning for the 6th seed to potentially play either the Steelers or the Ravens again. So both games that the Chargers lost, but they get another crack at it potentially in the playoffs if they stay as the number 6 seed. So that was only one of the scenarios that we saw, because the next one came yesterday, again in the 1 o'clock window, but again, another blowout victory with the Buffalo Bills taking apart the New York Jets to complete the sweep of them and win 40-14 as well. All three of these games that I wanted to talk about had 40-plus points scored in them by one of the teams, obviously winning the game, which is kind of funny how it all played out. But, the Bills, that was a similarity with the Chargers, but the difference was that they already knew they were going to be in the playoffs. But with this game, it meant that the Bills secured the number 2 seed, which is obviously important because you want to be the highest seed possible, obviously, but also, you get a good amount of home games before you end up maybe traveling to Kansas City, as a lot of people would probably predict. But it is good to know that you beat that same Chiefs team already this year, albeit in Buffalo. You definitely go up there with a bit more confidence knowing that you have beaten that team already. But that's still a long ways away. But yesterday, it wasn't much of a contest. I don't think a lot of people expected it to be, especially in Buffalo. But we did see another MVP-worthy performance from Josh Allen. He was involved in 3 touchdowns. And really for this Bills team, apart from just the fact that, they already had a lead, it was a pretty big third quarter that saw them score 21 points to the Jets 0. Obviously, that had them go out to a 33-0 lead, where going into halftime, they were only winning 12-0. But then, of course, those 3 touchdowns happened. There was a lot of turnovers as well, which the Jets didn't help themselves that much with, that led to this game being over during the third quarter. The Bills defense, like I said, had a lot to do with it. They had 3 takeaways on a pretty miserable afternoon for the Jets overall. And they clinched the number 2 seed, like I said. But for the Jets here, just briefly, it's more of the same in a season where obviously the expectations were a lot more built up than recent years before, because of the fact that you had Rodgers, Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall, you brought in Devontae Adams, but it's more of the same. The more things change, the more things stay the same, because the Jets will finish this 2024 season with 5 or fewer wins for the 7th time over a 14-season playoff drought, which is the longest active streak in the NFL, which is just obviously bad. It's a bad time to be in New York as a football fan, other than the Bills, of course. But the Jets and the Giants aren't really having too great of a time currently where things sit in the NFL. But the Bills handled business. They secured that number 2 seed, and like I said before, they would either probably play, realistically, I think the Broncos or the Chargers if things go a certain way. They could end up playing the Bengals in some crazy scenario, but we'll talk about that a little bit more in the next segment. But the Bills have at least earned themselves a little bit of a break here. I don't expect Josh Allen, any of their starters really, to play next week, so that'll be nice for them before we kick things off with the playoffs. But one last game here yesterday that we had to kind of wrap up a little bit was the fact that the Eagles completed the trifecta of 40-plus point victories with their 41-7 win over the Dallas Cowboys to not only sweep them, but also clinch the division, the NFC East, and also clinch the number 2 seed in the NFC. Just as exciting that division win and securing the number 2 seed was, it was also the fact that Saquon rushed for 167 yards to become the 9th player to rush for 2,000 yards. He finished the game with 167, obviously, and that brought him to 2,005 yards. And he now only needs 101 yards next week to break Eric Dickerson's rushing record, which stands at 2,105. And funny enough, how it all plays out, the Eagles are going to be playing the New York Giants, and then it raises a lot more, questions and debates about it, whether or not Saquon should play. And I guess I'll just give my thoughts, just because, I brought it up already. 101 yards is almost nothing, I think, for Saquon. And, of course, already the season that he's having is remarkable. It's certainly enough to just say, you know what, don't play. You reached 2,000 yards. You're only the 9th player ever to do that. I think sitting is okay, right? I think it would be perfectly reasonable for Nick Sirianni to say, you know what, we have bigger things in mind. Let's just sit everybody. And Saquon even said he'd be all right with that, but I think that's just a bunch of just insincere comments that they're saying. It's the right thing to say, but I think Saquon, and I think really the entire team, wants nothing more to cement themselves as one of the best rushing units, arguably in NFL history, right? If you break a record like that, you don't know if that'll ever even happen again, right? It could come close, but again, you don't know if you'll ever have the opportunity again to break a record like that. And again, it's not only Saquon, but it's the offensive line. You saw how excited their offensive line coach, Jeff Stoutland, was on the sideline. He was ecstatic how all the teammates went up to Saquon and congratulated him. And considering, everything he went through in the offseason, how the Giants didn't want him back, how they thought he was done, the fact that they let him walk and join a division rival and have a season like he's having, even though he'll never admit it, there's no way, no part of him wants nothing more to break that record against his former team, who thought that he wasn't worth that money. So I think if you're going to play him, maybe just a half, I think that would also be fair, but I think that would give him enough time to break it, and I would love to see him break it because he's had such a great year. To be this close, again, my biggest thing is you'll never know if you'll have the opportunity to do something like this again. I know they're not chasing personal records, but this is just, it's a next level of it. It's not just like kind of leading the NFL this year in rushing yards or anything like that. That could happen any year probably. But to be written in history like this, I think would be such a remarkable thing for them to not only get it in like a first half, but also then rest Saquon and be ready again next week, to play in the playoffs. And I don't think, it's just all about Saquon. Like, they need Saquon to have 110 yards each game. They're well-equipped everywhere else to have A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith have crazy games and still win the game like they did against the Steelers. So I would like to see him break it, but it was just a whole nother scenario where just in the game overall, the Eagles were always going to win this game. The Cowboys really had no one playing other than Micah. They had no Trayvon Diggs, no CeeDee, no Dak, obviously, and no DeMarvion Overshown. So they were always going to win this game and clinch the division, but I think it set up a bigger conversation about Saquon. So not only that, the Eagles, the Bills, and the Chargers know their futures a little bit more, and the Eagles would probably end up playing the Commanders or depending on how things go, it would probably be the Commanders or the Green Bay Packers, which would be a fantastic first-round matchup. But before we get to that, we're going to move on from this segment and talk about another game that we saw over the weekend between the Broncos and the Bengals. In my opinion, the best game from Saturday, arguably the weekend, but there was a lot of good games. So we have to talk about it because there was a lot of playoff implications for not only the Bengals and their victory, but also the Denver Broncos and how the result could affect both of them going into next week. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more when we return.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC. to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Back here on the show to discuss a little bit more from the weekend on Saturday, not Sunday, because I think this game, arguably, like I said before the break, could arguably have been one of the best games of the entire weekend, in my opinion, because the game took part in Cincinnati with a ton of playoff implications on the line for both Denver and the Bengals, but in the end, it was an overtime victory for the Bengals, 30-24, meaning that everything is still yet to be decided and will be decided in Week 18 of the NFL. But it was a game that the Bengals needed to win for that reason, just to stay alive in contention for the last playoff spot in the AFC. This was, oddly enough, the way the Bengals season has been going, this was the Bengals' first win this year against a team that was that had a winning record overall on the year. The Bengals have failed to do that, and this was their first time, I should say, that they won a game against a team that had a 500 or better record. And because of that, they extended their winning streak to 4 games, and now they sit with an 8-8 record. And on the other side, Denver loses its second straight game, and now they sit with a 9-7 record and still hold on to that last playoff spot as things stand today. At this moment, the Broncos still would be the number 7 seed in the playoffs if this was the last week of the NFL, but it's not. So, heading into next week, there's a lot to play for that we're going to get to, but more on this game. I think like most of Cincinnati's season has gone, it was a stellar performance by the offense yet again that got them in a spot to win this game versus not only, a very competitive Broncos team that really gave them a run for their money, but one of the best defenses, obviously, in the NFL with Surtain and how often they get to the quarterback. They did all of that in this game, but, the Bengals' will and the fact that they have Joe Burrow playing at a different level really made the difference in this game. And I actually have it up here to show you guys, what I'm talking about if you were unaware of how well Joe Burrow played in this game, because it was truly remarkable to see just how Joe Burrow continues to put on these performances, continues to drag the Cincinnati Bengals to a spot where they at least have the opportunity to be in these games. Sensational yet again. And all 3 of his touchdowns also went to T. Higgins, who also had a great game with 11 receptions and 131 yards. Not just to say that Pat Surtain was following Jamar Chase around all game, which he probably was. But, Jamar still had a decent game as well. He had over 100 yards and 9 receptions as well. But T. Higgins had all 3 touchdowns and over 130 yards and 11 receptions as well. But it all really stems from Joe Burrow, and as you guys can see on your screen, his MVP-worthy season continues. He's not going to get it, I don't think, because of the record and everything like that. Maybe if he makes the playoffs, it would be a little bit more in his favor moment in time, but the thing Joe Burrow and this offense has been able to do, really in the second half of the year, it's been remarkable. And if they were anywhere near where their potential could be, Joe would probably be the favorite right now for MVP, but, things stand where they stand, and, he is just doing everything he can to really drag the Bengals to a spot where they at least have the opportunity to make the playoffs. Now, they're going to need a lot of help, but anybody trying to blame Joe Burrow for, crucial turnovers or anything like that, just imagine where this Bengals team would be if he wasn't their quarterback. They would probably be somewhere where the Browns are right now. I truly believe all of that. So, as much as he has thrown some costly turnovers and things like that, it fails in comparison to where they would be if he wasn't even their quarterback, right? They would be nowhere near where they are right now, even with the opportunity to make make it into the playoffs, they would be nowhere near it. So Joe Burrow, I think, definitely should be talked about in a little bit more positive light. I think people are just taking it for granted for him just throwing for over 400 yards each game and 3 touchdowns. It's not normal, and he is definitely doing everything he needs to will his team to the playoffs. But in this game, it was a slow starting game, with Denver winning early in the game 3-0, and they held that for most of the first half until T. Higgins finally found the end zone with about 1 minute and 49 seconds left, and now the Bengals lead it 3-7. And also, not only did they get the touchdown, but they added a field goal as well. That was actually to start the second half, So they added a field goal, so now they lead 3-10, to start the second half. And then after that, Denver finally got on the board with their first touchdown on an impressive 12-play, 6-minute drive that finished with a great throw, first of all, by Bo Nix, and a great catch by Courtland Sutton to make it 10-10. So now, a little bit, you're starting to feel things start to pick up a bit. It's still 10-10, but finally, at least the Broncos showed a little bit of life there. And then we got a touchdown by each of the teams over the next 2 drives, including a Marvin Mims, I think I want to say 50-plus yard touchdown. I'm not quite sure. I do have it up here. It was a Marvin Mims, 51-yard touchdown to, just go back and forth with the Bengals. It's 17-17 now. But the next 2 drives, after each team exchanged a touchdown in the previous 2 drives, the next 2 drives were a turnover by each of these teams. T. Higgins fumbled, in which was a crucial moment. In the moment he fumbled, everybody probably thought that, the Bengals probably were playing themselves out of this game. But it wasn't until the very next drive, after they recovered it, that Bo Nix threw a even more surprising interception, I would say, right? He tried to squeeze it into a tight window to Courtland Sutton, but the Bengals picked it off. And they capitalized on that interception with a touchdown with about 1:29 left in the fourth quarter, and the Bengals leading 17-24 now. But to Denver's credit, they didn't go away. Their young rookie quarterback did not blink, and they orchestrated a great drive, but not that close considering, the ideal scenario. But, they orchestrated a great drive, and they got it down to the 25-yard line when it was 4th and 1 with, I want to say, like 8 seconds left in the game. It's 4th and 1, how much time you have left, and, all the intricacies of getting back to the line, snapping it and things like that. In about 8 seconds, there's not a lot really you're working with. And it's not like you're 10 yards out either. You're still 25 yards away. But the craziest throw that Bo Nix probably has made all year, and the craziest catch by Marvin Mims, resulted in a game-tying touchdown for the Denver Broncos. An insane catch, great throw again, like I said before, to make the game 24-24 going into overtime. And Cincinnati got the ball first, so initially you're thinking Joe Burrow gets the ball, they're going to win this game. But they punted right away, and then Denver had the opportunity. All they needed really was to just kind of hold on to the ball, because even a tie in this game, for how unlikely it might be, it would have still qualified the Broncos to make the playoffs. So really, they could have just played a little bit of keep away and, still tied the game, which would have been weird, but they still would have made the playoffs. But they weren't able to execute that really, and the Bengals got into a spot where they were in field goal range, so they went out there to try the field goal with Cade York. But in the most Cincinnati Bengals kind of way, they missed the field goal. It dinked off the top left upright of the field goal, and now everybody is just kind of in shock. I'm thinking there's no way he just missed this field goal. The Bengals are going to eliminate themselves on a thing that we've seen already probably twice or a couple times, right, by this team. But it was Denver, again, that weren't able to capitalize on that opportunity, right? They forced the Bengals to punt. they really didn't do much. They got the ball back after that missed field goal, and they couldn't do anything again. So you can only get so many opportunities against a guy like Joe before he makes you pay. And he did exactly that when he completed a massive 31-yard pass to T. Higgins down the left sideline, and then he threw a game-winning touchdown to T. Higgins as well. And the Bengals, in the most unlikely, wildest of scenarios, ended up winning the game, and they stay alive, which is disappointing for Denver because, a tie would have set them up for the playoffs, like I said. But despite how, demoralizing it was, they still hold their future in their hands next week because all they need is to beat the Kansas City Chiefs, and it would lock up the last spot in the AFC playoffs for the Denver Broncos. And like most of you probably know, the Chiefs are probably not going to play any of their starters. So it lines things up pretty nicely for the Broncos. So all they have to do is just win, right? They're going to be playing against a couple backups. So they have it pretty, not easy, but it is an ideal scenario if you're the Broncos, right? And if they were to win, it would eliminate any other scenario, right? It would eliminate the Bengals. It would eliminate the Dolphins from reaching the playoffs. But for the Cincinnati Bengals, right, this is exactly what they needed to happen to give themselves the opportunity, right? That's all you could have asked for by the Bengals, right? Just give them the chance, and if they make it, they make it. If not, they did everything possible, considering how this season has gone for them. But for the Bengals, what must happen for them to make the playoffs is that they first need to beat the Steelers on Saturday Night Football at 8 p.m. They need to win that game because once they win that game, they need to wait for the Broncos to lose to the Kansas City Chiefs and their backups, and also they need to wait for the Dolphins to also lose against the Jets, who are playing as bad as anybody right now in the NFL. That's what needs to happen for the Bengals to make the playoffs. They need to beat the Steelers. If they don't beat the Steelers, nothing really matters for them. They'd already be eliminated. But if they do win, they need Denver and Miami to lose on Sunday. So a lot to play for. The Dolphins also need to win and need to wait for the Broncos and Cincinnati to lose as well. He hasn't already proven it. He's going to do everything possible to make sure that the Bengals have all in line for them to make the playoffs. So he's probably going to have another big game on Saturday, and then we're just probably going to have to wait until Sunday, most likely. But we'll see where the weekend takes us. But for right now, currently in the present, we have a Monday Night Football game to talk about quickly here. A preview of the NFC Championship game from last year, a rematch between the 49ers and the Lions here. We'll talk about what it means for each team and the predictions and everything like that coming up right after this. Thank you guys for joining me here on the last segment of today's show, where we typically preview tonight's game, Monday Night Football, between the 49ers and the Detroit Lions. Back to only one Monday Night Football game. Unfortunately, in my opinion, tonight we got the Lions and the 49ers, like I said, a rematch of last year's NFC Championship game, in which last year's game was insane with how the Lions looked to just dog walk the 49ers in the first half, and then for it to just completely flip on its head the second half. It's really not even close to what that scenario was in tonight's game, because the 49ers are already out of the playoffs, and the Lions, last year they were the underdog. Nobody really thought that they were that good of a team, but now this year they've really been the team all season, but they're just decimated by injuries. So we'll see where the game goes and how it ultimately plays out, but very different circumstances from where we were almost like a year ago, talking about both of these teams. But now things, couldn't be more differently, like I said, and Detroit enters this game with a 13-2 record after completing the sweep of the Chicago Bears last week with a 34-17 victory, and they're still technically the number one seed. I know I mentioned the Vikings being the number one seed right now, but that's just because the Lions haven't played yet. So that their game's going to kick off in less than an hour now. So if they win, they are still technically the number one seed in the NFC, and they could have clinched it if they would have won, and Minnesota would have lost. But obviously that didn't happen, and like I said to start this show, it set up the finale that we have potentially next week if the Lions handle business against the 49ers. So the Lions still have a lot to play for, and it's crazy to think about because I think just the way things have all played out this year and how the Lions were just dominating teams week in and week out, it almost felt like the Lions were going to just be the number one seed, how well they were playing and everything like that. It just felt, at least to me, that the number one seed is going to go to the Lions. It's whatever, they're playing the best. They're going to be the number one seed. But to be in this position where the Lions need to win this game and next week to just have home field advantage and be the number one seed, and how everything still just comes down to the final game is insane to me, because I think the Vikings really haven't been talked about like the Lions have been talked about this year. But, there are some factors to that. The Vikings are much healthier than the Lions. And, going toe-to-toe with them, down the line, you look at Amon-Ra St. Brown, you look at Justin Jefferson, you look at Jameson Williams, you look at Jordan Addison, you look at TJ Hawkinson, you look at Sam Laporta. Jahmyr Gibbs, all right, we have Aaron Jones. The offensive lines are off the charts. And then you look at the quarterbacks, you might give the edge to Jared Goff, but then you look at the defense, and that's really where the health comes into play, right? There's no Aiden Hutchinson, there's no, Alex Anzalone for the Detroit Lions, and a bunch of other guys I know aren't coming to me, just off the top of the head. But the Vikings still have mostly all their starters healthy. Blake Cashman's healthy. Ivan Pace Jr. just got healthy again. Alex Van Ginkel, huge piece for them. Jonathan Grenard has been healthy all year and dominating as well. Stephon Gilmore is there still playing for them. Harrison Smith never gets injured. So they have their entire team healthy, which is obviously huge, but also playing well at this point in time. So again, it's just nuts that how well the Lions have played all year. There's an alternate reality where they don't even host a playoff game, which is crazy. But that obviously has to do with tonight's result and probably next week's result as well. But for San Francisco, not so much to get excited about. They probably can't wait to just flush this season down the toilet because of all the unfortunate injuries that we've seen from them. Not only the injuries, but just their own players just abandoning them as well, walking off the field like Devondre Campbell did. And they've lost 4 of their last 5 games as well. So, things just overall just can't fit in the right spot for the 49ers, right? And we talk about the injuries, right? You want me to read their injured reserve list? We got Christian McCaffrey, Jordan Mason, Elijah Mitchell, Brandon Ayuk, Aaron Banks, John Feliciano, Trent Williams, Javon Hargrave, and that's pretty much it. A bunch of their starters are just sitting on the bench, unfortunately, with a bunch of injuries that the 49ers have had to deal with all of this season. And even still, through the injuries, they had opportunities to potentially, at least be in the race a little bit, but it just didn't end up playing out for them. In some of the close games, I'm sure they would have liked back, but overall, It's just been one of those seasons for the 49ers, and it makes you think about how it always felt like the 49ers were always just going to be there, but it's a harsh reality when you get a season like this and nothing really just panned out in your favor. So it's definitely a wake-up call for them, and I'm sure they'd love to at least get like a pity victory here tonight and ruin the Lions' season, potentially, if they were to beat them in tonight's game. But it's going to take a lot, certainly. Some would even say it would be impossible for them to win, considering everything I just laid out. But you don't really know what's going to happen in some of these games, right? And where things stand right now, San Francisco's, they stand out of the playoffs right now, and their offense that has really not scored over 17 points in the last 5 games, except against the Chicago Bears. You look at this matchup now going up against the Lions, and the Lions lead the league scoring currently right now, averaging over 30 points per game, whereas the 49ers haven't been able to get over 17 in their recent performances. So that's something that just makes it an even taller task, but again, you don't really know. But, looking at the injuries ahead of tonight's game, the 49ers, their offensive line is all injured pretty much. There's no Trent Williams, and even his backup, Jalen Moore, is injured right now. He was dealing with a quad injury, I want to say. So I don't think he's playing tonight. Charvarius Ward is inactive tonight. Dre Greenlaw's not playing tonight. So those are obviously huge missing pieces for the 49ers overall, but their starting left guard is out with a knee injury. His backup's already out as well, so that means there's going to be a couple third-string guys starting on that offensive line for the 49ers tonight as well. So despite how injured the Lions, may be, that kind of evens it out a little bit, right, with how many guys the Lions have had to shuffle through. But on the side of the Lions, these two teams are probably two of the most injured teams right now in the NFL. Obviously, there's not going to be any David Montgomery. There's, I think, Terrion Arnold. He was dealing with a illness, but looking at the injury report right now, he does not have an injury designation, so Terrion Arnold is going to play. Also, another interesting piece to all of this was Khalif Raymond, one of their wide receivers and a very good special teams player for them, also had the potential of playing in this game, but I still see him on the injured reserve. So he had an opportunity to be active for this game, but it didn't end up happening. So Khalif Raymond is still going to be out for them. So there's not going to be any of Khalif Raymond in this game as well. But overall, they've had most of their guys on the IR anyway, so it's not really too much to report on the side of the Detroit Lions when it comes to injuries, right? David Montgomery, we knew he was going to be out already. And funny enough, I'm seeing Teddy Bridgewater on here. If you guys didn't know, he signed with the Lions back for after his season in high school. He signed back and came out of retirement to be on this roster, which is pretty cool. I just kind of forgot about it, but I'm seeing him now on the inactives list, and it just kind of reminded me of it. But shifting over now to the matchups, there's a couple here to keep an eye on. And overall, looking at this team, one of the matchups to kind of focus on would be an injured offensive line going up against an injured defensive line for the Detroit Lions. Can the Lions get something going in their favor in this matchup, right? There's going to be third stringers playing for the 49ers. Can they do something with maybe their own second string players or third string players to kind of swing the momentum in their favor? What kind of performance can you get from maybe some of your reserve players is going to be a huge indicator in this game. Another matchup I'm looking at is going to be more one-on-one. Fred Warner against Jahmyr Gibbs. There's not going to be any David Montgomery or Drake Greenlaw. So we're going to have a very entertaining one-on-one matchup. Fred Warner, how maybe he matches up against Jahmyr coming out of the backfield, how he gets to Jahmyr quickly and often, hopefully for the 49ers in any running situations. That's going to be a great, chess matchup to see. and how Ben Johnson kind of uses Jameer to move him all over the field, and how often also Fred Warner kind of follows him and he orchestrates and commands his defense to know where Jahmyr Gibbs is at all times. And funny enough, I mentioned Ben Johnson. That's also going to be a matchup I'm focusing on. Not only Ben Johnson, but Aaron Glenn, the two very highly talented coordinators for the Lions. Ben Johnson on the offense and Aaron Glenn on the defense. How they match up against Kyle Shanahan and his offense and Nick Sorensen, the defensive coordinator for the 49ers, right? Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn, really the masterminds with how well this Lions team has been playing and how well they scheme up each of their sides of the ball. And you can't get much better than Kyle Shanahan, right? He's been one of the gurus, if you will, over the past seasons on offense. So how does Aaron Glenn stop his offense and his scheme? And Nick Sorensen for the 49ers as well hasn't been having a great season per se. So how does he try and stop now one of the best, if not the best, offensive play caller currently in the NFL in Ben Johnson? I think that's going to be super important to see how, they play off of each other, right? In a chess game, so to say, between the coordinators on each side of the ball. But in terms, finally, of who's going to win this game, I'm going to go with the Lions, not only because they still have a lot to play for, right? Their whole playoff, the road to the Super Bowl depends on them winning this game. So the fact that they have that to play for is greater than the 49ers just playing spoiler, I believe, in this game. And with the offensive line being so hurt for the 49ers, it really troubles me because they don't have Christian McCaffrey, no Isaac Guerendo, and no Jordan Mason. So, the running game, I don't really expect to be there. And, I feel like Brock Purdy is going to be under duress all night long. So, I think it's just simple as that. And really, most of all, there's nothing better, I think, in my opinion, than Sunday Night Football next week and seeing the Lions play for their playoff lives for the number one seed against the Minnesota Vikings. It doesn't get much more cinematic, high stakes, high reward than that. I want to see that next week. So the Lions can't lose this game. They're going to win this game, I believe, pretty comfortably, I would say, just for the simple fact of the injuries. I want to see the winner take all next week against the Vikings and the Lions. So we're hoping for that. I'm betting that the Lions win tonight, and we'll see how it actually goes. That game's set to kick off in about 30 minutes from now. So with that in mind, we are going to sign off for today's show. Again, if you guys weren't here for the reminder at the beginning of the episode, we're going to be back on Friday until, we're back to our full regular schedule next week. So I'll be back on here on Friday for another live show. But for right now, thank you guys for joining me on today's episode. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as checking out more of the content around GMC, but also the Chip Shot Football podcast on the YouTube channels, the GSMC Sports Network channel and the GSMC Podcast Network channel, where you could find more NFL coverage, breaking news, matchups, previews, everything around the NFL with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host. Again, thanking you guys for joining me, and I'll see you guys back here on Friday, not only in a new episode, but in the new year. So I hope you guys also have a good New Year's tomorrow as well. So I'll see you guys back here on Friday.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee